Thank you.
Hey, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for the 90th week of the Free Assange Vigil series. My name is Andrew Smith, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Misty Winston. We have Deepa Drive Diver with us today, and later on we will have Mohammed Almazi joining us as well. But before we do that, I do want to run through some numbers here. This is day 3,756 of the illegal and arbitrary detention of Julian Assange. It is day 717 since the WikiLeaks founder was trafficked from the Ecuadorian embassy to Belmarsh prison following a $4.2 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund, the nation of Ecuador. We have 15 days until the 2-year anniversary of when that took place, which is April 11th. We have 81 days since Vanessa Baraitser's January 6th ruling denying Julian Assange bail after 2 days earlier denying extradition and ordering his release. We have 1,380 days of federal incarceration for whistleblower Reality Winner. We have 716 days of political prosecution of Ola Bini, friend of Julian Assange, by the Ecuadorian government. We have 373 days of freedom for Chelsea Manning, so that is a little bright spot there. And we have 21 days of freedom for Jeremy Hammond. He is not completely free of the correctional system. He is still on monitored release, but he is no longer in a penitentiary or halfway house or anything like that. So congratulations to Jeremy. With that, how are you doing today, Misty?
I am doing very well, thank you, sir. It is finally not freezing cold in Ohio, so my mood has improved dramatically. I hate winter.
Yeah.
Oh, how are you doing today, Miss Deepa? I'm so happy to see you. You're one of my favorite people to talk to.
Thanks, Misty. That's really nice. Yeah, I'm good. We've just had a nice day out in the sunshine, so I think, the minute you have a bit of sun, you begin to feel a little bit better about life, the universe, and everything, eh?
It really is true. I mean, all winter I feel really crabby and irritated, and then as soon as it's so funny because they joke in Ohio, like when it's 50 degrees in October, everybody's like got sweatshirts on and pants and everything, but then when it's 50 degrees in like March, everybody's got like shorts and flip flops on because we're all so excited that it's not cold anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we call underwear pants here. So when you say pants for a second, I was thinking you'd have to wear them all the time.
Well, I guess you don't have to, but you probably should.
You don't have to, yeah.
At least in October and March.
Oh,
So,
boy.
before we dive in, we do have events planned on April 11th. We will
And we're
be
still
having
planning more.
Yes. The two formal Action for Assange events are taking place on April 10th and 11th in LA. There's going to be an independent media, essentially press conference, roundtable, and educational panel for independent media out in Los Angeles. And then on the 11th, there's going to be a march throughout the city. We should be getting info on the website about that either today or tomorrow. We're having our first official planning meeting tomorrow because we're kind of picking up from the Clovers for events and moving right into this. So
That's
there
cool.
are other events. I want to make sure I get them here because we forgot to mention all of the international events we had on.
Oh, are you going to mention all the ones coming up or the ones we already
Yeah.
had?
The ones coming up.
Before you do that, I just want to mention again, I have been helping people recently again on Twitter. I had some people reach out to me from Seattle and Portland and New York that are interested. Oh, and somewhere else. I forget where else. But if you are interested in organizing an event or if you are interested in finding an event that you can join in, please contact me on Twitter. I've been matchmaking people with different groups, different organizations. I've hooked some people up with the New York group. We have people who are now organizing in Portland and Seattle, and they have reached out to me to like try to find more people to join their event. So if you want to organize an event and you need help promoting it or you need help finding people to attend, let me know. Or if you want to organize an event, let me know and I will help you to the best of my ability figure out how to get started, what permits you need, all that stuff. So please just reach out. I'm happy to help anybody who's willing to organize. So yeah, go ahead, Andrew. Tell them what we got so far.
So on the 17th for the Clovers events, we had DC, New York, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Tampa, Florida, We had Wellington and Auckland, New Zealand. We had Mexico, London, Vienna, Amsterdam, Geneva, Brazil, Canada, and 2 events in Germany. And let me pull up my camera might go weird for a second while I pull up this list from Alex, so I apologize about that. But I just want to make sure I can give
Big
everybody
shout
a
out to
shout out.
Alex Hills, who does an amazing job of keeping track of all of the international events and promoting them and keeping them organized. She is amazing. I love her.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure London will be doing something on the 11th. They will probably have to be more covert.
London has a bus tour planned.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because they're it's not good there for them right now. They have to be very sneaky.
Yeah, I actually just got the message. I don't have the full list of events yet for the 11th, but we do have them building. We're probably going to be doing one here in Columbus, in Ohio. This will be the first time. This is the first time ever we've done events outside of DC, and it's the second time we've done events not lining up with a particular court date. So it's really cool to see the momentum build outside of what the government gives us as dates and times for these things.
Yeah.
But with that, I did want to go back over to Deepa because we did have a bunch of movement with Craig Murray's case, and most of our viewers are familiar about it. And once Mo joins, we'll kind of dig into it. But Deepa was a legal observer for that, so I just kind of wanted to open the floor to let her talk about that situation and her thoughts on what's happening with Craig Murray right now.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, firstly, I just want to say, when you were reading out those numbers at the start, isn't it just appalling that despite being told that he won't be extradited, Julian continues to be in prison? I mean, so many people have contacted me saying, habeas corpus, shouldn't he be out of prison? And what really amazes me is the number of lawyers who I contact on various grounds who, the narrative in Britain has changed. Most normal people have now completely got it that Julian is being stitched up. But I am just amazed at some of the professional classes, lawyers particularly, who just don't get it. They're like, oh, didn't he hide in the Ecuadorian embassy? You just think, I mean, come on, give me a break. Don't you guys read?
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
And they're so aggressive about it. That's what really upsets and bothers me, because, when people engage in reasonable debate with you and are willing to talk about things, it's one thing. But when people try and hide behind all kinds of identity politics to avoid confronting the real questions, that really, really upsets me.
Yes.
And in the Assange case, this is more evident than in most. And I think there's also this underlying problem that we don't generally talk about, which is that the minute you, as a woman, get interested in the Assange case or support what's happening in relation to WikiLeaks, the assumption is either that you're stupid and dumb and, have been misled, or the assumption is that you're a rape apologist. And both of those are so terribly wrong, given how much we now know about the case, especially from, I know April's also an interesting time when we will see lots of information around Julian's case ahead of potential hearings in May. So I kind of think of Julian's case, and I think about the one person who's made a big difference to the public being able to understand what was going on in the case when nobody else was reporting, and that was Craig. And now they've managed to, go after Craig in a way which is just quite aggressive.
Yes, very aggressive and really pretty ridiculous. It really breaks my heart too, because I've never met Craig Murray, but he seems like such a lovely man, and to see him going through all of this is just really sad. And I hope he knows that there are a lot of people out there that support him and are pulling for him, because he's really getting shafted and it's terrible.
Well, the important thing about Craig is that he's always been quite a courageous man when he was blowing the whistle on torture in Uzbekistan. That's how Craig really gained some notoriety in some ways, in addition to his own colorful personality, was when he revealed details of how the Uzbek government was torturing and murdering people who were opposed to, who were dissidents, essentially, including I remember this horrific story. I think I read it in Craig's book, or maybe I heard him talk about it, about his grandfather who was a dissident. In order to teach him a lesson, they put his grandson's body in a vat of, was it? I think it was acid, and this kind of horrendous, gruesome torture that the British government kind of was slightly complicit in, when they were willing to allow these kinds of murderous dictators to be armed, to be given support. And you see that with the British government even today, where they, you have Boris Johnson concerned about Bolivia and Janine Áñez's position. And actually, when the coup was happening, when ordinary citizens were being killed by Áñez's right-wing government, and the British were kind of keeping quiet. And in fact, you can see now how the British have been complicit in so many other things, particularly with respect to Venezuela, holding on to Venezuelan gold here. And now there's a great article by Joe Glenton. I think it was in the Canary today, or I think it was in the Canary today or yesterday, where he's talked about what it means when we have this new set of paramilitary kind of troops who are going to be above the law. And in Britain, of course, the Spy Cops bill kind of passed, and now we're having the protest bill, where in Bristol yesterday night, a peaceful protest, and the protest was. I had friends who were out there, and they were, everything was fine, and then the minute the police joined, or rather the minute the police had a chance, they got aggressive and they released dogs and they started hitting people with shields. What was really worrying is the Avon and Somerset police deal with, I believe, Bristol, but a neighbouring force from Gloucestershire, their chief police, I'm just trying to remember his title. He's a big head honcho amongst the police. I can't remember whether it was chief of police officers. I can't remember the actual title. And he tweeted out that there's no such thing as policing by consent, and that we aren't servants, we are not public servants, we're servants of the crown. And you realize that much of what a lot of policemen and a lot of soldiers, if they were to question authority and question some of the orders they were given, we wouldn't have the kind of horrific disasters that we have today. And instead, what a lot of these people at the top are doing is encouraging ordinary people who, get into the military or get into the police in order to pay bills, and who are decent people who want to uphold the law in some way or contribute to their nation in various ways, and drag them towards a position where all they're doing is protecting the interests of the top 1% and the very rich and the very wealthy, rather than...
That's kind of a refreshing, refreshing honesty from him, really, because I don't think that there's any doubt that I think most people, most regular people are aware of the fact that the cops are basically just protection for capital and capital interests and power, the powerful. So the fact that he said it out loud, I mean, at least he's being honest about it. He's not pretending to be like a public servant.
Yeah,
well,
he
in the
tweeted it out.
He
tweeted it out. That was what was amazing. Sorry, I spoke over you. Go for it, Andy.
No, I was just going to say, in the UK, that seems like particularly like flabbergasting, because at least to me, like as a dumb American, I see the images of like UK police officers as like the Monty Python constables, like the guy with the billy clubs that'll like chase you around, and that's about the extent of it. So I think for at least culturally in the UK, like that's a huge change.
Yes. Yeah, they've gotten
Because
so much more aggressive, at least just as an outside observer over the past several years. I've noticed it. I'm used to aggressive cops. I'm an American, like we're used to cops beating the crap out of people for no reason. We just had them beating the crap out of people in Echo Park over the homeless encampment. So that's something I'm used to seeing here. But I mean, the UK, to me, it always seemed like their cops were more subdued and more patient. They were more, focused on what's the word I'm looking for?
Petty crime.
Yes, yeah, like and they focused more on taking the situation down, like not escalating things and unnecessarily being aggressive, and that's really changed. And now the protest bill that you guys have, that's terrifying. It's
Well,
insane.
what's really interesting is, some of us who were involved in the Assange campaign saw this kind of aggression last year, both with Black Lives Matter and with the Assange campaign, in terms of the way in which policing was actively aggressive. The judiciary went out of their way to make it difficult for observers to attend court. They dehumanized you at every step of the process, whether you were somebody from the outside or whether you were Julian Assange. Remember when he was brought in that small, what somebody referred to as an upright coffin, all the way from Belmarsh to the Old Bailey, and every day he was strip searched, as though this publisher was about to commit the same kinds of crimes that they are locking people up for. And it's just awful that although we saw it early, nobody was listening to us. So when, for example, I talked about the way in which the police were intimidating, I think people heard it, but they kind of thought, oh, well, it's only the Assange people. So it's kind of okay. But now it's happening to everybody. And, we said this about journalists more generally, which is first they came for Assange and many journalists looked the other way. And now I think journalists are beginning to realize, because when they're out in Bristol, they're getting beaten up. And and slowly, I think people are beginning to realize that, especially the educated middle classes and upwards, because working class people have always seen the brutality of the police, whether it was in the miners' strike or whether it was at Orgreave or whether it was, Hillsborough. And I especially if you're on a picket line, you recognize that, the police are there to protect the powerful, not to protect you. But
yeah.
And I think one thing that has been different about Britain in terms of policing is the fewer numbers of guns on the street in terms of British cops carrying guns and weapons. But I think I was looking at some evidence of how British cops started getting involved in using tasers, and I was amazed at how much the big four consulting firms have been involved in advising the Association of Chief Police Officers in terms of the safety of tasers. And everywhere you go, whether it's in higher education where I work, whether it's in prisons, whether it is in the judiciary, whether it is in healthcare, all you can see is the big consulting firms making a lot of money out of advising people at the top how to shut down dissent and advising people how to steal money from ordinary people and redistribute it to the rich. And sorry, it's a completely different track to what we were talking about, but it all comes together because that's what Julian's work was about. He was not just about war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was also about trafficura dumping toxic waste off the Ivory Coast, or, TTIP, and the way in which they were making trade agreements where corporations could sue countries and get damages from sovereign countries and impoverish poorer countries. And that's really important to remember, because Julian, Craig, David McBride, all these people are about, Chelsea Manning, of course, and all the big whistleblowers are about holding power to account. And that's, in Craig's case, unfortunately, I won't comment about the case because I am the legal observer. I am one of the legal observers. I don't know if there's anybody else, but one difference I saw in terms of monitoring Craig's case is, do you remember when we when I tried, I think we spoke when I tried to monitor Julian's case and how difficult it was to get access, and how I wrote to Vanessa Bereza the Haldane Society has been going for over 100 years. We monitor trials in Turkey, we monitor trials in other parts of the world, but less than a kilometer away from where the headquarters is at the Old Bailey, they weren't letting us into the main court. You had to go into the adjacent room using the public gallery, thanks to the help of people like earlier on, people like Jamie and others who were on the picket line, and not at the picket line, sorry, in the queue, and Moritz, myself, Rebecca, Vincent, we all queued very, very early most mornings, and the same later on for the verdict and the hearings at Westminster Magistrates. And we're going to continue to do that, because these powerful people need to know that they haven't ground us down yet. And every time they shut down a Craig, there will be 10 other Craigs. Every time they shut down an Assange, there will be 20 other Assanges everywhere else, getting really mad and standing up. And people who were like me, who were not particularly involved, are all going to start getting involved, because you can't shut down peaceful protest.
Yes, I 100% agree. And I'm so glad that you brought up the fact that Julian has exposed so much corporate crime, because I don't think a lot of people recognize that. The casual kind of observer thinks that he just, kind of published stuff about the Iraq war and Afghanistan and war crimes, which all that stuff's really important. But he has also exposed a lot of corporate corruption and criminality, and that often gets glossed over. People, seem to forget or be unaware of the fact that he has done a lot of that. You can go to WikiLeaks.org and hit in the search button, Monsanto or whatever, and there will be lots of stuff that comes up. So I think that a lot of people need to make themselves aware of that and really go and look through the stuff that he's leaked on those corporations, because that's invaluable. These corporations are screwing us all over daily. Besides like the toxic dumping that you were talking about, there's just so much that they're doing. They've completely bought the United States government. Essentially, the United States government is completely controlled by corporate America. So we really need to make ourselves aware of that and fight back harder against that. I think that gets kind of lost in the mix in all of this. So I'm glad that you brought that part up.
Thanks. Could I don't know if this is a little bit of a distraction from what you wanted to talk about, but could I say a few words about what Julian did, particularly for people who may not have joined the vigil before? I think one of the nice things about, or rather the important things about what Julian did was, number one, we all use a Dropbox today, but what Julian did in allowing a secure Dropbox that offered security to whistleblowers, not only security and safety to whistleblowers to anonymously put their documentation for others, for journalists to see, but also security of the documentation so that we know that what's in the documentation is accurate. That was really important. What was also important was Julian's ability to be able to think up alongside all the different people at WikiLeaks, and there are quite a few people unacknowledged for various reasons, for their own safety, etc. But Julian took the brunt of all the attention and the abuse as well. But one of the things that he also did was to allow two layers of journalists to look at it. Journalists who were ensuring the accuracy of the data, of course. Some journalists who were global, say your New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, all the people who've dumped on him later. But all these people who had an international platform and who were interested in the big cases, and some of them actually did show a lot of courage at the time in revealing, in piggybacking off Julian's work and showing this stuff to the world, but also stuff that was really local. For example, in Tunisia, in helping change the government there, which was hugely corrupt, in a number of African states, providing sufficient information for people to be able to hold their government to account, and working with local papers. And as I was preparing for the Stratfor Leaks event, I was listening to some of those people in terms of the Al Akbar journalists, etc., who were talking at the Stratfor Leaks press conference. And what they were saying was about the amount of rigor that was there in what Julian was doing in terms of people cross-checking, making sure nobody could be harmed. But also, one of the things we have to be really really quite honest and brutal about is the people who were really harmed were the people who were tortured, murdered, raped, disappeared in various parts of the world. The threat of harm to other people, supposedly, these are the people who were colluding with Britain and America and the Allied forces to destroy their own countries, is something that, you know, quite rightly, Julian was saying, well, you know, they did these things, they got people killed. So to suddenly pretend as though you're concerned for their safety and that's why you're prosecuting a journalist is just absurd. And it is shameful. You know, every time I hear about criminality at Belmarsh, I worry, because I think this man who's a peace-loving journalist stuck there amongst people who not, and funnily enough, these prisoners have shown him much more loyalty and support than anybody on the outside, but it is still a very dangerous, scary place, as any prison would be, because there are a lot of people, particularly during COVID, who are locked in 23 hours a day, who have serious mental health and other concerns, who have addiction, who have other problems caused by a failing state, largely caused by a failing state. And putting a journalist amongst them where, you know, but you just say the wrong thing, you do the wrong thing, you know, you can get really harmed. And this man shouldn't be there. And
No, it's ridiculous, Deepa. He has no violence in his history. He's not a threat to anybody. We're in the middle, like they said, he's a flight risk. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. Everything's locked down. You can't try, and he's one of the most recognizable people on planet Earth. Where is he going to go? It's ridiculous that they're trying to claim that he's some kind of a flight risk. And I'm also really glad that you brought up the fact that, you know, they try to claim that he put people in danger. You know, even if he did, which there's zero evidence to support that claim, like that's been admitted in court, they have zero evidence that anybody was ever put in any danger by WikiLeaks releases. But even if he did, what about the victims of the war crimes that he exposed? To me, the risk reward ratio there is a no-brainer. Like, we should be able to expose the war crimes of empire and hold them to account. I mean, that seems like a very basic thought. And you're right. WikiLeaks and Julian Assange completely revolutionized journalism. 100%. They changed the game. Every single major publication now has a secure Dropbox. The Washington Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, Le Monde, all of them. They all now have the secure Dropbox that Julian Assange invented. And that revolutionized the game. That changed everything in journalism. And I think a lot of people forget that.
And it also changed the power balance, because you had all these media organizations controlled by oligarchs, and so people were pressed to a news cycle, forced to report on what the oligarchs are willing to report on. And actually they said, no, instead of the state surveilling you, we will surveil the people, will surveil the state.
Yes. That's the way it should be. That is the way it should be. I have said this a million times. People in power should be terrified to do anything wrong. They should be terrified to be corrupt or be criminal. They should be looking over their shoulder constantly, worried that they're going to be exposed. That's the way the world should work. Powerful people should be scrutinized like nobody's business. And then regular people should have privacy. That's the way it should be. And that's not the way it is right now. Now, you know, the people in power, the NSA has all of our emails, all of our texts, all of our phone calls. They know where we shop, where we go to school, where our favorite restaurant, what kind of car we drive, where we go on vacation. They know everything about us. And they sell our information like it's nothing. It's like, you know, data is now like the most valuable resource on planet Earth. And that's crazy business. We need to flip that. And when you said earlier that, you know, you hope that when one Julian Assange gets attacked, that 20 more rise up and are tired. And I really hope that you're right about that, because that's what we need. I have said that so many times. We need like 1,000 WikiLeaks across the globe, constantly monitoring people in power. That would be ideal. I would love to see that happen. I think that that's why they're treating him so poorly, is they're trying to discourage that from happening, and that he's like the head on the stake. He's the warning shot. You know, this is what happens if you mess with us. And so that's
Well,
what we're kind of up against.
one of the other things too that WikiLeaks represents, and what Julian's trial really represents, is essentially like the global barometer of tyrannical pressure. How you see these evil institutions pushing on the liberties of society. Because it wasn't until after Julian's trial, like we were almost 2.5 months through the start of coronavirus, whatever you believe it to be, for whatever story you hold in your heart about it, right? We were 2.5 months in. Julian Assange's trial happened, and there was essentially a media blackout in February of 2020. And it was only after that point that the major media institutions, the major social media platforms felt comfortable enough to roll out mass censorship algorithms to combat coronavirus and medical misinformation. So just being able to look in perspective of what's happening with Julian's situation relative to the rest of global events really sheds a lot of light on what's happening. Like even with Syria right now, you had the Donald Trump administration run on I love the WikiLeaks, right? Put the man in jail, bomb Syria on a false flag attack, have it proved to be a false flag attack, and then Joe Biden continues to go after Syria. Like that's how you can tell, like characters and personalities aside, if you literally just follow the storylines for what's actually happening, then you can see right through all of the bullshit that gets put out there.
Yeah.
And to tie it
There's
back
a concerted effort to squash all dissent. Like any narrative outside of the approved establishment narrative, they are trying to squash. That should terrify everyone. You should be able to question everything, literally everything. If you think COVID is fake and you think it's some like hoax created by the government, you should be able to fucking say that. You should be able to ask questions about it. You should be able to, even people I don't agree with that I think are Looney Tunes and that are just like they need help, they should be able to voice those opinions. That's what free speech means. And having social media giants, having the amount of control that they do over the discourse that's allowed amongst society, that should terrify everyone. It's horrifying to me that the fact that these... Go ahead.
Go on. I was just going to say, don't you think it's weird that Amazon is now putting out messages online and trying to influence social media? I saw a tweet where somebody said, don't you guys realize you're already in power, so you don't have to come and talk to us again on Twitter? But it's just bizarre, these companies which are forcing people to pee in a bottle because they won't give them enough time to do their jobs. I read about an Amazon type company in Korea where people are getting hamstring injuries like really top athletes do because of having to move around carrying things from one place to another at a particular pace. And it's the same with how yesterday there was this really funny bit of information that came out because there's lots of information about the Home Office expenses that are coming out. Priti Patel, she's our Home Secretary, shameful woman. Lots of people, when she came into power, said, "Oh, isn't it nice to have a black chancellor and a black Home Secretary?" You just think these people have they have no relationship whatsoever with ordinary black people in terms of understanding what they went through in life. These people went through elite schools, went into elite institutions, are married to elites. The chancellor, for example, is married to one of India's billionaire's daughters, and they've never experienced ordinary life like any ordinary people. And so you see all this, and you just think she spent £77,000, or rather, the Home Office spent £77,000 on an eyebrows company, somebody who shapes eyebrows, right? And you just think. These people are unwilling to pay a minimum wage. They're unwilling to. We have kids here who have to rely on a school meal at lunchtime to be able to be fed, and these people they've taken that away, and you just think, you guys are the scum of the earth.
Yes. Well, we now have progressives in the United States. AOC yesterday, an interview was released with AOC where she was calling people privileged for criticizing the Joe Biden administration and saying that, oh, well, you just don't care about black and brown people because it's so much better under Biden. No, it's not. He's deporting a ton of people. He's bombing a ton of people, black
He's
and brown
caging
people
a ton of
across the globe.
children.
Yes, yes. There's still kids in cages. Like, the fact that she is calling people criticizing Joe Biden privileged and bad faith actors is disgusting. It is
Yeah.
so despicable. And then the fact that there are people defending her just makes me nauseous. Like, y'all really need to stop. She's dangerous. Period. End of story. But yeah,
It's
and I
just
love the
funny
fact
how-
that the. Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
Go on. No, you go.
No, I was just going to say also we were talking about, how they've really started to come after, the so-called false information or misinformation. Why doesn't that ever apply to CNN when they push false flag stories about chemical attacks in Syria, or when they lie us into another war, or when they misinform people? They're misinforming people about COVID daily. I mean, nobody knows what's going on because they don't do their jobs. So it's interesting that that doesn't apply to them and it only applies to people who are speaking outside the approved narrative.
Yeah.
So that's just it's really frustrating. Hi, Mo. Hi, Mohammed.
Hey, Mo.
Hello. Many apologies for my delay. I've just
No,
gotten
that's
back.
okay.
A wizard's
You're a busy
never
man.
late, Mo.
So
I want to thank you very much for joining us. First of all, I know it was kind of short notice, so I appreciate you being able to get on. But I did want to ask, because you wrote a wonderful article about Craig Murray. If you could talk a little bit about what happened in court and what the ruling was, and kind of how that played out a couple days ago.
Okay, sure. So I haven't had a chance to go in depth into the written opinion, but I can. So in terms of the explanations behind why they decided what they decided, but we can discuss the background and what they decided. So have the audience already heard? Have you already discussed the case itself, like what he was charged with?
Yes, we did on Tuesday.
Previously.
We we have previously. So if you want to give like a brief, quick, whatever. But yeah, I think most of them are pretty informed on it.
Okay, so very briefly, he has a Craig Murray, a former diplomat and former whistleblower, a former ambassador to Uzbekistan on behalf of Britain. He has a blog, which is a fairly popular blog, which he writes on human rights issues and whistleblowing issues, as well as local Scottish politics. He was covering the trial on, 13 allegations of sexual assault allegations that were levied against the former First Minister of Scotland, who's Alex Salmond. So just for people to understand, the UK, okay, it's a country or it's a state, but it's made up of multiple other countries with their own devolved governments. So there's the main one in Westminster, which has most of the power, and that's where the UK Prime Minister is, etc. But then you also have a local Scottish Parliament, a Scottish government, which has their own executive branch, their own legislator, their own court system, their own criminal laws. And so it's not called Prime Minister there, it's called First Minister, which incidentally, Prime is just the first among equals, right? The first among ministers anyway. So, Craig Murray was, like a number of people, very skeptical about the case. There's huge amounts of evidence, actually, which I only discovered when I was researching Craig's case, so I could understand the background to his case. To understand his case, you have to understand the case being brought against Alex Salmond. And there's plenty of evidence to show to show improper and even what you might even call conspiratorial malfeasance among high-ranking members of the SNP and leading civil servants behind the prosecution that pushed forward the investigation and prosecution of Alex Salmond. And in fact, before his trial last year, Alex Salmond, because of information that was leaking out, about backroom conversations and their WhatsApp conversations and the like, he actually brought what's known as a judicial review, which basically means where you get to go to a judge and get the judge to consider whether or not certain decisions that are made by a public body, any public body, or anybody behaving in a public fashion. So it could be a regulator that you can judicially review. It could be a local government, local councillor, a decision that has to do with zoning or what have you, or it could be the Home Office. And so he judicially reviewed the process by which the prosecution was brought against him. And the judge found that it had been contaminated by apparent bias, that it was unlawful, unreasonable. So, and that's quite a high bar to get a judge to be able to agree to that. That was before he was even tried. Ultimately, he was nonetheless tried, and he was acquitted on all the charges. Craig Murray had covered that trial. He got access, and he wrote various blog posts. He tweeted as well. And there are people who made replies to his tweets and comments to his posts on his blog page. He'd also published articles well before the trial happened, and that's significant for this trial, for his own contempt of court charges. So preliminary hearings started to emerge, right? Because the trial is just the final stage, if you like, of a criminal proceedings. You have initial hearings, eventually a jury is impaneled, you have legal issues that get settled before it even goes to trial. And he published articles which were very critical. One which was largely a letter that was sent to him by somebody who'd sent it behind closed doors, sort of off the record, basically critiquing the ever amount of increasing evidence that there was sort of conspiracy involved with high-ranking members of the SNP, as I'd already said, to lead to the prosecution and the charges against Alex Salmond. One other article he wrote was done in the form of satire, in the style of an old satirical show here called Yes Minister. So sort of think of a sort of In the Thick of It, if you know In the Thick of It, or the guy who did Veep, right? So it's a political satire, and basically he uses characters between a fictional first minister and a fictional high-ranking civil servant who then conspire to kind of undermine her main competitor of the same political party, right? But it's all fictional. But it's basically how can we drum up charges, and it doesn't matter if they're true or not. Eventually, something will stick, right? That's the theme of that article. So Alex Salmond's trial happens. He's found not guilty on all charges. There are actually ongoing calls for, and there's in fact a parliamentary inquiry and another independent investigation to see what's happened with this case against Alex Salmond. Was there improper behavior among the civil servants? Why is it that when we've asked one civil servant to explain something, it appears that they lied because they came back and they changed their story? And so this is the background to that. Craig Murray then finds himself being charged with contempt of court after Alex Salmond is found not guilty. And it's alleged three main things. One, that he violated a court order that related to not discussing the reasons given by the lead prosecutor as to why two jurors should be excluded, because during the trial, two jurors were excluded. And the judge issued an order that says nobody can discuss what was said from this time to this time on this date by the chief prosecutor in the case as it relates to the exclusion of the jurors. That was one charge. Another charge related to whether or not the two articles that I mentioned that were published 6 months before the trial, and in one case 10 months or 10 or 11 months before the trial happened. So the satirical one in Yes Minister theme, that was 6 months beforehand. The other one was 10 months beforehand. Whether or not those violated the Contempt of Court Act, which in that they create a substantial risk of prejudicing the jury. And then the third one, is whether or not his articles, either in isolation or in combination with other articles and other posts, that either he wrote or that others did also, whether they violated a court order as it relates to not identifying the identities of protected witnesses. In this case, those would be the alleged victims against Alex Salmond, right? And that is known as, in this case, jigsaw identification. And the reason it's jigsaw identification is because he hasn't identified who they are, but it's whether or not a person could piece together information like a jigsaw, right, a puzzle, and piece together information from this article and this blog post and maybe something else that was publicly available, and piece them together and be able to determine the identity of a protected witness. And he was found not guilty on the first two charges because he wrote an article where he hypothesized why the members of the jurors were excluded. And the prosecution, even though they brought the charge against him, they admitted that he didn't violate the letter of the court order because he didn't discuss what the reasons that the chief prosecutor gave, which is what the court order was about. He gave his own reasons as to why he thought the jurors were excluded. But they thought he should still be prosecuted for that charge for like violating the spirit, if you like, of it. Thankfully, and I assumed they rejected that. So he was found not guilty on that. On the charge of those two articles of creating a substantial risk of prejudicing the jury, well, they had 6 and 10 months, respectively, to do something about that. They could have brought those articles to the attention of the judge, right? Because the judge had already been selected and said, hey, this article we think might creates a substantial risk of prejudicing the jury one way or another. So can you create an order, a court order, or direct him to take it off? But they never did that. And they admitted the fact that they considered that at the time and rejected it. But they still thought that he should be able to be prosecuted by that, which I find pretty outlandish. So you're waiting months, the trial happens, and then you want him to be punished for this, even though you never raised it to the judge. Thankfully, after the trial, they also rejected that argument as well. Oh, just so you know, in contempt of court, he had 3 judges. There's no jury. And the lead judge, the one who in his trial, his one-day trial, the contempt of court trial, the lead judge is the same judge who presided over Alex Salmond's case. She's the second most senior judge, I think, in Scotland, Lady Dorian. So then it comes to the third one, which he was found guilty on. And that is when I had originally spoken about this and originally wrote about it. This is where I thought it could go either way, because it comes down to how liberally or conservatively they choose to interpret jigsaw identification, right? So the defense argued, I mean, in their case, they're called the respondent, but we won't have to go into why. So I'll try to avoid the technical correct legal language. So you have the petitioner, and that's the government, is the petitioner in this contempt of court case, and he's the respondent. He's the defendant is the respondent. But I'm just going to say the defense in this case, yeah, just for simplicity's sake. The defense argued, yes, every case is going to be specific. So if there is a woman in a very small town who works at a lighthouse and she was sexually violated or allegedly, then the mere fact that you mention that a woman in a lighthouse is the complainant would be enough to violate jigsaw identification, because it's a small town and there's only one woman who works in the lighthouse, right? But that would be specific to that. In a different case, a more complex case in a bigger environment, you'd have to think of it differently. They also argued that the more liberally you want to construe what it means to be jigsaw identification, that will then put a burden on the judges to be more precise in their court order, because then that's not fair. Then you're finding people guilty for violating something that they otherwise could have avoided violating if there was more clarity. right? So because the court order didn't go into specifics, it's just that you cannot publish information that would likely result in the identification of the protected witnesses, right? The prosecution argued that the way the law should be interpreted is not whether somebody in London who reads Craig Murray's blog posts could piece together the identification, but whether or not somebody in Scotland who potentially might even have knowledge about the case. So that could potentially mean somebody who works with one of the alleged victims, who already has inside knowledge, could then piece together information. And that was one of the key kind of arguments. How do you interpret this rule? Because it's not that often, by the way, that people get prosecuted for this, right? Also, journalists, like I want to say proper journalists, people who work with established outlets are more likely to be aware of this, right? Because this is a long-standing thing, contempt of court, right? Of not identifying, of not publishing information that could prejudice a jury, especially after a jury's been impaneled, et cetera, et cetera. So where am I at? The other
Real
issue.
quick, if I could I ask you a question about jigsaw identification?
Yeah.
Because it's something you mentioned how it's very vague and it can be used very broadly, almost at the discretion of a judge. And I'd put it in the
or can it? That's the interpretation.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
That's what was part of the discussion and the trial, is how broadly can you interpret this?
And it reminds me a lot of the Espionage Act and how it can be broad brush stroked or pinpointed at the discretion of the individuals responsible to interpret it. And I think that's something that's really common across any law that is used to limit free speech. Whether or not jigsaw is or isn't okay, or should and shouldn't be done, there's also the issue of an esteemed journalist like Craig Murray. He's not going to put things out there to harm people. So laws like this open it up to allow them to come in and say, hey, let's find a way to pull this journalist in or get this journalist to stop talking. Because in Craig's case, I believe it's actually cited in the indictment, his work on Julian's court trial as one of the things that makes him such an influential Scottish journalist, and why these charges should be put forward, because his message does get spread that far. And that's one thing that the U.S. actually argued in court too about Julian's situation, where they were talking about how multiple other websites and how other publishers put this information out first. That Cryptome had the information on their website. David Lee's book put the information out to get access to it. But the U.S. government, through QC Lewis, argued that it was the impact of the WikiLeaks publications, more so than them being published, that allowed them to use the Espionage Act. And it seems very similar to the way jigsaw identification can be used to say, well, these people may have said these certain things, but this one individual with an impactful platform said something that we think might have this impact, so we have to go after them.
Well, you're right, but in Craig's case, as his defense pointed out, there are others who put out potentially, arguably, far like greater levels of jigsaw identification, but with larger platforms, like within mainstream sort of certainly mainstream outlets, and they put that in as examples. So that would be a case of selective prosecution, although I don't think they use that term when I was looking through the submissions. Technically, by the way, it's a petition, not an indictment, because there's no jury involved, right? So he wasn't indicted. There's a petition that is filed. But anyway, that's I said I wouldn't go technical, but then I can't help it. I went to law school, and so it's just like, so there's
it's kind of hard to not
I really appreciate the distinctions, because we have
and
we
you're
try really hard to
translating
make sure we're accurate.
States, right? You're translating from the United States. Although I don't know how it would be in the US when it comes to contempt of court, whether or not, because contempt of court proceedings can be brought either by the court itself or by a prosecutor. And in this case, the prosecutor, the advocate deputy or depute, is actually a branch of the executive. It works in the executive, works with this, which is interesting as well. You could have had it maybe a bit more. Well, anyway, that's coulda, woulda, shoulda. So that is an important point to note, is that in his case, there are those with greater platforms who were not prosecuted, and I think that is something worth, they noted it, but that is, I think, a legitimate position, is that how can you do that? That appears then, I mean, that you're just applying the law in a very selective manner, which should then undermine that case. They also argued that the defense argued that you need to have space for good faith errors, especially when it's not clear cut case. And then it comes down to on which side you come down on. Normally, you'd think that where there's ambiguity, it should come down on the side of the defendant, right? So if it's ambiguous as to whether or not somebody has actually violated the law, then it shouldn't come down onto that person to saying, yeah, you violated it, where you then convict them and strip them of their liberty. It should be in favor of greater liberty. I understand the arguments in favor of, I mean, it's a court order. If there's a court order saying you can't identify a witness, then the court order says you can't identify a witness. It just gets more complicated when somebody argues that you can piece in information from various things that you have written, combined with various things other people have written, combined potentially with your own information, knowledge that you may have that's more intimate and related, and that piece them all together. And you don't have to prove that somebody has identified a witness or protected a witness as a result of a combination of jigsaw information, right? So it's not that they had to prove that somebody was identified this way, just that it could have resulted. And there's the threshold that needs to be satisfied. And I'll read the judgment to see how it is that they determine that threshold was satisfied. But you're right that they also argued something, that when Craig was trying to gain access as a journalist to Alex Salmond's hearing, he told them that he has a wide reach. So now they've used that against him, right? By saying, look, Craig admitted that his platform has a wide reach, which is what he said in order for him to gain access as a journalist, because there's limited space for journalists. And that's normal in law. So when I was dealing with an immigration case, it was argued, okay, the defendant has integrated fully into British society. He's proven to be very adaptable. He has many friends, etc. And then the other side argued, oh, well, look, he's very adaptable. He's been able to integrate. So it'll be fine if we send him back to Libya, right? Even though NATO is in the middle of bombing it, because then he'll be able to find a different city, even though he didn't live there. He's very adaptable. And this was argued. I was there. They argued that. So, and if you argue, well, he hasn't been able to integrate as well then that counts against you. It's like, well, then he needs to leave. He hasn't been able to integrate into society. So it's whatever information is there can be flipped, and you could see how it could be used either way. And I suppose in a sense that's the lawyer's jobs, but that can also show, it can result in sort of perverse situations. So yes, he's been found guilty. My guess is that he will almost certainly appeal to the Supreme Court. Sentencing won't be till 7th of May. So various submissions will be filed, either in aggravation if the prosecution are so inclined, or mitigation, definitely, by the defense, such as the fact he has a newborn baby, he's got health problems. He took down the website, so his blog was taken down immediately when he found out that it looked like he was going to be found guilty on at least one of the charges. He suspended the blog, so it's on maintenance mode. I don't know if it still is now. I suppose
no, it's back up.
Is it back up? Okay, so he's put it back up. Yeah, so it's gonna come down to a very sort of technical legal arguments as to why, right? Because it's going to really come down to how they found that he'd violated the rules as it relates to jigsaw identification. But not just that, is the interpretation of the rules. What is the test, right? because before you decide whether or not he's violated the threshold, you have to decide what that threshold is. What is the test, and how do you interpret the law as it relates to jigsaw identification? Or are you actually creating new law? Because sometimes when you come into new ground, the courts are creating new law. And because it's the same judges that are finders of fact are also the finders of law, they're determining what the legal threshold is, and then they're determining whether or not he's satisfied that legal threshold, or whether the prosecutor has satisfied the legal threshold for him to be convicted. So if he's at sentencing, it's a upwards maximum of 2 years in prison and an unlimited fine. So we'll see what ends up happening with that. I hope that was clear for the audience.
No, I think, yeah. I mean, it's a lot.
The fine thing is what really gets me, because it's something you see almost transitioned from the U.S. to the U.K. with the way they treated Chelsea Manning, fining her $1,000 a day to sit in maximum security isolation. Is there a...
I don't know if
Do
that's
we know if-
transition, though. That could be very old.
Well, I just meant like seeing the same application used on whistleblowers and journalists, I guess is a better way to put it. But do we know if there's a fine system set up? Like, do we know roughly what they plan on fining Craig? Or is it kind of still just like a warning shot, like an unlimited fine is possible beyond this point sort of thing?
Yeah, so I don't know. I haven't seen how many. I know somebody else was sentenced to 6 months for violating contempt of court in the same case. I don't know if he was also fined, though. So I don't know. I mean, maybe they'll say no to any custodial sentence and yes to a fine, or it's at their discretion. So the short answer is I don't know, and that's why there's an entire month and a week for submissions to be made in mitigation to see whether or not. I mean, they could end up saying no custodial sentence and a £10,000 fine or something like that. You know, what I mean, it's up to them really, depending on the facts of the case. Especially if they feel that it was okay. He violated the rules we've determined, but maybe only just about. And so therefore, it depends on how seriously they consider him having violated the rules, if you like, and how willfully, right? If they say it was a good faith error, yes, we found him guilty, but it was a good faith error, and actually, it could have under separate circumstances gone a different way, then they may do that. If they want to come down hard, it really depends. Like,
yeah, I think this is like process as the punishment again. It's this is really just them going after Craig Murray because and I know that there's no like direct evidence that it's tied to his coverage of the Julian Assange case, but it feels like that's probably very likely. But go ahead, Deepa.
His coverage. This is very domestic to Scotland, I would say. I mean, whether or not the WikiLeaks element has a possibility, it is possible. But this is I mean, it's difficult to describe how contentious things are right now in Scotland between the split in the Scottish Nationalist Party, those who are backers of Alex Salmond, those who back Nicola Sturgeon, who's the current First Minister. I mean, that is a huge... The fact that Craig Murray is known to be very critical of Nicola Sturgeon, a very strong independent supporter, and an ally of Alex Salmond. So, and the fact that these charges were brought by the government of Nicola Sturgeon, right? So, like, it is the prosecutor, the advocate depute is not an independent party. He's not an independent prosecutor. He's part of the executive in Scotland, right?
And I think you have to, in all these cases, whether, I think it was interesting that you drew that parallel with Chelsea, which is the use of the law to shut down, to intimidate, to induce fear, to tire, to consume the financial and physical resources of anybody powerful elites decide is their target. So anybody who criticizes or holds to account powerful elites who like to go about their businesses behind closed doors and engage in huge criminality, huge lies, huge corruption. In Chelsea's case, so much evidence of serious harm to generations and generations of people, hundreds of thousands of people killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in Craig's case, the serious concerns about people in positions of tremendous power colluding with each other. These are about, human rights defenders, whistleblowers, journalists, civil society organizations. And, you should be worried about this if you're an environmental rights defender, if you are somebody who cares about your local school, your local hospital, because the minute you stand up against these elites, they can use the law to shut you down. And that's what's really dangerous about these cases. They don't even have to win. They just have to make it so miserable for you and make you as an individual lose so much, as they've done with Chelsea, as they've done with,
John Kiriakou,
Donziger.
Julian Assange, on and on. Yeah.
And with Donziger right now, who's, held in house arrest, and with Craig, because, irrespective of what you think about this case, and I won't comment about it, but it is about people who are expressing a public opinion on matters that these elites see as uncomfortable. So, how they either blacklist you, or they shut you down, or they use the law to make your life miserable.
Yeah, they sure do. And they're very good at it. They're very, very good at what they do. I mean, just go ahead, Andrew.
No, I was just going to see if Mo could talk for a little bit about what was happening surrounding the prosecution and Google in the Craig Murray case.
Do you remember when they were talking about how they altered the searches by,
Oh, right. So there was a debate or a discussion about. So the government had brought in evidence that if you put in certain information into Google, the identity of somebody shows up, right? And the defense and the judge seemed to accept this, although I have to go through the judgment to see how they addressed it, but they did seem to accept it, at least at the time, was, well, you can't do that because search results are changing constantly. We would need to know what the search results were at the time. You cannot put it now. And the very act of putting in search results changes future search results, right? And also, and this is what they're saying, this is just the nature of how the algorithms work. And so therefore, sorry.
Yeah, if you search for something and you keep clicking
sorry, I
on
was
it,
just asking if I wanted fish and chips.
Oh goodness, we're doing it live.
And so that was an interesting thing, and I didn't really see the prosecution. It seemed odd to me that didn't occur to them. They were like, "Oh, yeah, right." Yeah, because it was you need to know what the results would be at the time. If you can't show what the results are at the time, then this is useless information. This is not telling you what whether or not somebody could have identified a witness during the time period that it was barred to do so by the court order 10 months ago or 6 months ago or whenever the articles were written. And so that was the other issue, was whether or not he was responsible, and it does seem whether or not he's responsible for replies, retweets, and comments. It does seem, and I do have to read this properly, so don't hold me to this. The prosecution definitely were arguing that that Craig should be. He should be responsible for the things people say in his tweets, reply, which I think is pretty outrageous, and also comments on his blog. And I suppose there's a stronger argument for comments on the blog than because at least he has theoretical control over that rather than tweets. It's like, well, I have no control over who retweets and what they say afterwards, right? And it does seem that they may have been leaning towards accepting that he's got responsibility for comments that people have made in the comment section for like improper moderation, which I find that interesting as well. But if I don't know whether or not that's actually settled law in Scotland or not.
Improper moderation? Is that
Yeah,
really
so if
like a
somebody
thing?
says,
Like,
I figured it out, I think it's Sarah Jenkins, right?
Oh,
Then you
yeah.
need to like delete that, basically. That right? So like, so as a result of your article, somebody then replies in your article on your blog, right? So I'm just using the term improper moderation. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that that's actually the like the law of improper moderation or anything. We have yet to reach that level of dystopia, I think. Although we're approaching it. We're not far away.
Yeah, it's not far away at all.
So
It's
that was the
terrifying.
Google, yeah, that was the Google situation of just using search results, months later to show that, well, this is what we got. And also the defense pointed out, they're like, well, we put in the same data and we didn't get that result. So yeah, I don't know if that was the prosecution being dodgy or whether or not, I mean, bear in mind, the other thing that you have to realize is that if you're logged into your Gmail account or what have you, then you will get results that are specific to you as a result of how you've been searching as well, right? So if you're logged into your email account, your Google search engine will act differently than if you're not logged into your Gmail account. And quite often, for the longest time, I didn't even realize that it's saved in. So I've shut down the computer. I come back in. I go into Google and I search. And I don't even realize that it's still logged in. That I have to choose to sign out of my email completely. Shutting down the computer makes no difference. So yeah, that was a major flaw and I would say in the prosecution's case, but it didn't rest on that. That was part of their bricks, if you like. That was part of them trying to show that it was possible to identify through Jigsaw the protected witness identity by putting it into Google information that they got from one of his blogs or some of his blogs. But that was counteracted by the defense, as we just noted. So then it comes down to, I think, really the various articles he wrote. If you combine these articles, could it lead to the identification of a witness, especially even if it's combined with other information, external information? And once I've read through the judgment more properly, I'll let you guys know, just so you can update your, I mean, I can come on, or you can just update I could write a little blurb and then you could update to let your audience know what exactly it was that they determined in order to find him guilty.
Yeah, you've been doing a great job covering this case. So, yeah, I appreciate your work. And I mean, obviously, we can share. I know you said that you're going to be reading through everything and then putting out an article on that. So we can definitely share that. And then, we'd love to have you back on to discuss it in more detail, because I think for a lot of our audience, we have a lot of, American audience. And so the stuff that's going on with, Julian Assange in the UK and Craig Murray in the UK, that's kind of like for us, the hosts of the show, we've kind of had to do like a crash course on the different law aspect of things there, but I think it's a little complicated, and there's so much nuance and there's so much detail and little moving parts that it is a lot to keep up with. So yeah, I would love to have you back on to talk about it for sure. Deepa, I think Deepa has to go. Yeah, Deepa, do you want to tell everybody where they can find you and follow you on Twitter and everything?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Deepa_driver, as in car driver, and Deepa was like deep blue ocean with an A at the end. But I'll hopefully, if you get in touch with Misty or Andrew, they should be able to put you in touch as well. And
Yes.
Good luck, guys. Thank you for keeping this going. I mean,
Yeah.
It's just amazing that you keep this. It really helps connect people, and thank you for what you're doing, connecting different groups of people as well. That's really important. And see you guys, and big, huge respect to Mo for covering all this and for explaining it to the rest of us. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Real quick, before you go, Deepa, is there any Free the Truth events planned soon?
Ooh, well, maybe I could I could mention it here. We're planning a huge whistleblowing event.
Yay.
Which will be 3
Awesome.
days worth of whistleblowing stuff. So we're just trying to organize dates and stuff. So we should have, if people have any suggestions of the kinds of whistleblowers we want to have on, because we want to have a range of people journalists, whistleblowers, and others talking about various things, and also maybe some creative ideas about what we could do, because hearing talk after talk after talk can get a bit boring. So if you can think of something you can do online, but also which is a bit more party, so that'd be quite nice. So we could actually have a proper whistleblowing festival.
Yeah, that's exciting. That sounds like a great time. I love whistleblowers, so I'll definitely be tuning in for that.
Yeah,
But
I'll
yeah,
send you
thank you,
some
Deepa, for all
ideas
your
on how
work on
to.
that stuff. Yeah, we'll send you
Great.
some ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so
I
much,
haven't
Deepa. That
mentioned
sounds
this
awesome.
very widely yet because we haven't yet gotten everything off the ground, but fingers crossed it should.
That's
Take care,
okay.
everybody.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you, Deepa.
Cheers. Bye. Bye, Mo.
Okay. I love Deepa. She's the best.
So I know we don't have you for too long, Mo. I know you have some stuff going on today. But I did want to get just like broadly, if you're willing to give it, your opinion on the whole situation. Because I think it's really just personally, with Craig being one of the top reporters on Julian Assange's situation, I try to look at it from the perspective of the class war, where you have these oligarchs trying to limit the information that we get. Do you see any of that with Craig Murray's prosecution? Maybe not with the meat and potatoes of the charges, but just the broader implications on how he lost access to the National Union of Journalists and all of the other little things that came about aside from the legal proceedings.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that given the selective nature of the prosecution itself, and given the fact that they threw in two charges that to me appeared totally bogus, in the sense that, like, 11 months pass after a publication, and then you're saying that article created a substantial risk of prejudicing a jury, that implies bad faith to me, because it's like, okay, well, you should have gone at the time, and that's even what the judges said. Like, why didn't you go to court at the time? And their explanation is rubbish. Like, we considered it carefully and decided not to. Okay, but then you decided months after that to go and levy charges. It makes no sense. That makes no sense. And so even though one of them is their strongest case, the Jigsaw one, because it can be interpreted as widely as you potentially would like, the fact that they had two others that just seemed to be thrown in there says to me that they weren't even sure. They're just front loading the charges, right? You're trying to dump in as much as possible to get something, which suggests to me bad faith, which implies a greater level of possibility of politically motivated prosecution. And then when you understand the wider political implications of this case, which is why I described, this is about a prosecution of a former first minister, where there's all kinds of evidence of conspiracy that led to those prosecutions, and the fact that he's a public supporter of him and a public critic of the current government in Scotland, that does say to me, it certainly strongly suggests to me politically motivated prosecution. Then I would also be quite critical of the fact that when it came time to get back into the National Union of Journalists, it was constantly being blocked, and it was unclear who and why, and it was just taking forever for that to get resolved. And given the fact that all kinds of people are members of the NUJ, it shouldn't be this long drawn out, quiet. I'm a member of the NUJ, right? And it shouldn't be this long drawn out, like, behind closed doors process where even the person himself doesn't know what the hell is going on. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, if you come out and you piss enough people off who hold power, then that is going to impact against you. And that even means when it comes to organizations that ostensibly should be there to help you, if the heads of those organizations are able to be influenced or pressured or are friends with other people who don't like you, then that will also impact on you. I've seen it also in other cases with the National Union of Journalists, where there seemed to be a reflexive knee-jerk reaction against people who are lefties by the like general secretary of the NEJ, and in favor of journalists who came from and were linked to an establishment outlet. I'll give you an example. There's a guy who did reporting for The Guardian, on what was going on in, I want to say Bolivia. Was it Bolivia? And actually, I'm going to say it wasn't actually. And let me get the correct. Let me get the correct country. Max Blumenthal wrote an article which was published with us at the Canary. The Canary is a left progressive outlet here in the UK that I publish with, although I haven't done too many recently, but I do. And I helped him to start getting publishing with the Canary so he could get wider reach with his pieces. And it basically looked at this guy and his links and his links to the right and far right that were seeking the overthrow of the government there, and basically saying that this guy, the Guardian is and others are publishing his material, but like this guy is an open partisan with these sort of like quasi or just outright reactionary elements, and he ends up getting deported from the country, right? Whereas in Britain, you could even potentially be charged. Can you imagine if somebody was a journalist, was like actively collaborating or cooperating with elements whose open position is the overthrow of the government, the violent overthrow of the government? Like, you might not just be deported, right? And the NUJ came out with a condemnation of the deportation and our alleged role in facilitating that. And it's like, well, first of all, I don't think people were waiting. People over there in Latin America were waiting for our article in English published here in the UK to know who this dude is, right? Like, you're assuming just because we're revealing things in English that nobody knew, and people did know. It was discussed on Facebook who this guy was in Spanish, right, in the country of origin. But then there was also the fact that's like you haven't looked at the facts of the case, and there's loads of evidence to show this is completely illegitimate. And that was a position, it was like a reflexive position taken by the head of the NUJ, another position they took, where one of the co-founders of the Canary was selected to give a sort of a Black History Month. So every year, a section of the National Union of Journalists will pick somebody to give the Claudia Jones Memorial Lecture. Claudia Jones was a Black radical feminist who set up the first Black newspaper here. Right? She was like a revolutionary Black female feminist, Claudia Jones. And Carrie Ann Mendoza was selected, was it last year or 2 years ago, to give the Claudia Jones Memorial Lecture by the Black members of the National Union of Journalists who fill a particular spot at the NUJ, whose job is to select that. And then there was a reaction by certain members at The Guardian, apparently, including from my understanding is, and I could be wrong, Nick Cohen, who's like a total reactionary neocon figure. And it was supposed to be held at the Guardian headquarters, right? But just that they offer their headquarters, and this is before they know. So that's the agreement. You don't get to decide after you know who's selected. This is before you know. In the end, the Secretary General or General Secretary, whoever, overturned the decision. So it didn't end up happening. So literally the Claudia Jones Memorial Lecture didn't even end up happening that year. So you basically have a bunch of white people overruling a bunch of Black people about who should speak about, and one of the persons, Carrie Ann Mendoza, is a woman of color, right? And she's a journalist. I mean, that's the whole point, is to have, a Black journalist speak. And here she is, a female Black journalist who co-founded a left progressive outlet. Claudia Jones herself was a radical. And so that's just an example of how the NUJ, unfortunately, doesn't always seem to come down on the right side of history, or maybe it is coming down on the right side of history, capital R, right. And so, yeah, perhaps in that respect, maybe it's not that surprising that someone like Craig Murray, if somebody files a complaint, finds a very long, drawn-out process and trying to figure out, who is the complainer? What exactly is the complaint? How may I address it? this complaint that's preventing me. It's like, Kafkaesque rules, sort of like how the Labour Party internal structure works, where you don't get to know who filed a complaint against you. You don't get to know the specifics of the complaint. You have to realize that you can freedom of information request documents to help you for your case. And if technically it's part of the freedom of information. It's a subject access request when it's about you. When you want information that's held on you, it's called a subject access request. When it's on somebody else, but that doesn't really matter. It's a data protection information. You need to know these things. They don't tell you. They don't say if you want the document so you can challenge your suspension, this is what you have to do. So there's a very, very Kafkaesque system there, and I don't want to say that the NEJ is necessarily that bad because I'm only aware of a couple cases in that case, but yeah, I mean, this is what ends up happening, right? You bridges get burned. Other people, there's the radioactive factor. Other people don't want to associate with you because they will then get burnt potentially, or they feel pressure. And that's how it works. And the more your job is dependent on being in an establishment outlet, the more pressure like that you could feel, right? So it's mainstream pressure, if you like, and also, well, if everybody needs a job and everybody needs income, right? And when the economy is not doing that well, and there aren't that many options out there, as for example now, then people are less likely to be brave, as it were, right? Because the cost is too high. So yeah, I think Craig is suffering as a result of his outspoken nature, regardless, as you say, of what you think of the specifics of jigsaw identification. But even then, it is one of those things that you could, I'm prepared to be fair and objective. I could like somebody and say, yeah, it does look like they violated the rules, right? But this is one of those things where you could come down on either way. It's not 100%. It's not like,
Right.
yeah, he blatantly violated the rules. And when you can come down either way, I think as a general rule, your position should be on more liberty, not less. Right? It's not like we're in a state of emergency, we're being invaded and occupied by some alien force, and then you have to make sure that the insurgents are protected so they can sufficiently expel this alien force, right? There are times where you could argue you need less liberty in defense of the wider liberty of survival of society, if if it's like World War II level situation going on, but that's not what's going on over here. And I do find it interesting that the one or the two, the most why are all these other people not prosecuted who did more jigsaw information? Right. So, and I have an issue with selective prosecution. I say that if you're going to prosecute certain people for possession, arrest, and stop and search first of all, and then arrest and prosecute these people, certain people, for possession of illegal narcotics, then you should be doing it at the same level everywhere else. And if you're not, then this is just an opportunistic law that you can use to sabotage and undermine and harass certain communities and not others. I mean, if you were to do it in the city of London, which is our Wall Street, if you like, you have loads of people who have cocaine and what have you on them, but they don't get stopped and searched, right? So people with the briefcases and the suits walking in and out of high finance buildings aren't being harassed by the police. But if they want to be fair and honest, right, and say, oh, but the law is the law, then that's what they should be doing uniformly. And then I think you'll find the law being changed pretty bloody quickly. But that's the whole point, is it's not meant to be applied to everybody uniformly, which is how you can have years and years and years of unjust laws, because not everybody suffers at the same extent. Some people don't even realize that certain laws are on the books because they will never experience them directly.
So, Mo, I did want to get your opinion on something unrelated, right? Because it recently came out in a report that I believe it was Reuters and The Guardian were working with the Counter Disinformation Unit to put out anti-Russian disinformation through their networks. Did you hear about that story as it came out?
So I'm not aware of The Guardian. BBC and Reuters.
It may have been BBC. I may be
BBC.
misspeaking. Yeah.
So Kit Klarenberg and separately Max Blumenthal via their own outlets. Kit Klarenberg, I think, via RT, and Max Blumenthal via the Gray Zone, ended up writing articles, and Kit's done a number of them. So people should absolutely go to RT and find Kit Clarenberg, type in his name, Kit Clarenberg, and read his pieces on a treasure trove, if you like, of documents that show contracts with all kinds of various networks. So the Zinc network and others that are like joint enterprises with Bellingcat and the Digital Forensics Lab of the Atlantic Council and other organizations to fund and organize and perhaps even create, but in other cases to fund and manage independent, quote unquote, and opposition groups and organizations that are, and in the Russia case, it'd be that are pro-NATO and anti-Putin, right? And so, I mean, this is major. And there's even more information evidence here, I would say, even than with the Integrity Initiative, which what I and Kit, that's how we came to know each other, is that we were both independently researching and publishing on the Integrity Initiative from a couple of years ago, which is, once again, a Foreign Office funded program as well, which also had funding from NATO and Facebook and the, I think, US State Department, I think I put in money. So along similar lines. And this is like the kind of thing that if was revealed that Russia was doing it, people's minds would be exploding, right? This is like the kind of scope which was constantly being implied through the level of Russiagate sort of reporting, but never proven, right? Never established. I mean, we're talking about straight up organizations being directed and funded by the Foreign Office, and that includes Reuters, a supposedly independent, I won't say neutral, but like its own news gathering, and it's a wire service as well. So information that they produce, that's their main commodity, if you like, is producing information that then gets wired out to all news agencies around the world that subscribe to it, and that feeds into what other people publish. Bellingcat, I mean, this is now proving for those even who had any doubt that Bellingcat is little more than like a front for the foreign. I mean, this is straight up, you're supposedly this grassroots, independent, open source investigative outlet, and it's like you're actually being funded by the Foreign Office. It's like, just flip that and say that the Foreign Office of Russia, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, you're being funded by that. Not like places I've published with, say like with Sputnik, where it's known, right? Where it's unknown. That's the whole point. So if you know, like Voice of America, okay, Voice of America is like funded by the US government. So you know it is funded by the US government. You know RT, and right, that's where they get their, France 24 is funded by the French government, Al Jazeera by the Qatari government. But what if you don't know, and the appearance is that this is an indie outlet, right? And any issues you may have with their reporting, you can ascribe more to the ideology of the people who are there, and the fact that they may be influenced by other things they read and other people they speak to and what have you, even if you think it's flawed. When you see that they are actually being covertly funded by a government, then that sort of, and is completely surreptitiously, right? Then changes things a bit. Then it's more like, oh, okay, you're basically like a covert agent of a power that has an explicit objective. And yeah, that's pretty outrageous. People should absolutely go and read about what has been revealed, because there's so many levels to it. And it's not just there's loads of batches of documents. There's also in Syria as well. Right. So before that, the first publications I think showed like various networks in Syria, the Russia element. Basically, if you will espouse an and it's also to help like train. And the thing is, there will be those who don't even know. You know what I mean? Like, you will just join up an organization. You might be critical of the Russian government or what have you. You don't necessarily know that the head of the organization is coordinating with members of the Foreign Office or what have you, right? You don't know, and that makes it like all the more of an organic feel, because that is the whole point. The point is to have groups that appear. See, the thing is, they understand, the rulers, if you like, and their servants understand changing zeitgeist, right? So we are in an era now, over the last 10 years, of increasing like indie media coming out. So absolutely, there are those are okay. We need to get on board with that. Just as you had the increasing an era of increasing NGOs, especially abroad, from decades ago. So okay, that's where we get on board, and we try to see how we can have NGO, because they, for the longest time, they have this good image. Oh, it's a non-governmental organization. You know, if you ever watch like a rom-com or what have you, whenever they want to superficially show that somebody is a good character, like the love interest or the one that the woman wants to get or the guy wants to get, she works for some like, you know, vague NGO, right? And so
Yes.
yeah, it's always it's a non-governmental. It's like, oh, that's so great. And of course, they don't go into the specifics of it, or rarely, you know, or something that's non-controversial, right? So they don't alienate any of the audience, right? It's but and there's a reason for that, because it has a generic sort of positive image, and they're obviously playing off of that. I mean, to the degree of like day-to-day monitoring. If you read some of the contracts, like weekly and day-to-day monitoring as to messaging and things like that. And so that basically means that these are practically, or if not outright, then quasi-government run outlets by states that have an openly hostile position to these other states. And so yeah, that's just, I mean, that makes it propaganda. That makes it covert state propaganda to meddle, interfere in the affairs of a power, and a power that you're not even officially at war at, right? So you might say, well, in war you're actually blowing people up, so anything goes. But this is, they're not even officially, while complaining simultaneously about, you know, apparently huge levels of Russian interference in our society, even though it's very, you know, it's a classic case of projection,
Oh,
right? Of
yes.
projecting onto one's, I don't want to say adversary, it's a chosen adversary, because Russia does not want to be adversarial with NATO. They're happy to be shared capitalists, right? To like plunder the earth along with, in alliance with Britain and the United States. It's just that the
Yeah.
Americans don't want them to be partners. What they want them to be is like subservient, right? They want them to go
Well,
back
and we
to
also need a
towards
boogeyman. The United States needs a boogeyman to, you know, be able to justify the continued funding of the military industrial complex. And,
yeah, but
you know, we
that's
got
the
to be
role of
prepared for
China.
Russia, big, scary Russia.
Yeah, but that's
You know.
China. That's how people should notice the shift is to China, because
Mhm.
Russia isn't, economically speaking. So yeah, it has more nukes than China, but economically speaking, it's got like the economy of Italy, I think, the last I looked, in terms of size, which is
Mhm.
large, but
I
it
think
is.
they used Russia just because it was so effective. McCarthyism in the 50s was so effective. It was, they could just use that, and it was still kind of like, it's still kind of ingrained in people's brains in the United States. Even if you weren't alive then, it's kind of something that you've been propagandized with your entire life. And so you hear the word Russia, and I think that sets off like a fear thing. And so I think that Russia was really just used as a distraction.
Well, also
But you're
because
right,
the
it is now
anti-China
shifting very
thing,
much to China.
the anti-China thing hadn't been fully developed yet into the psyche. There was no
Right,
even loose ability to link Trump with
right.
China, right, in the same way. So there is a pre-existing, basically, Putin has been there for a few years, as you say, he's been established. So Robbie Martin has done a brilliant documentary. It's actually a trilogy, which I cannot recommend enough. And the first one, well, it's called A Very Heavy Agenda. And it basically looks at, basically takes loads of video clips of news, you know, from C-SPAN to Democracy Now to whatever, and pieces it together to portray this narrative of, first, you know, basically to describe the project of the neocons, as it were, as you say, to have this boogeyman, and you see the shift from the war on terror towards Putin and Russia. And there's a brilliant montage scene at one point, which is incredibly trippy, where it's literally, it just buzzes through, and it goes on for like a few minutes. And it's a very trippy scene where you just watch as it's transitioning towards Putin. And it's done very, very well. It must have taken him like hours and hours. I can only imagine, as somebody who's done like little minor things on, like, you know, where I've taken me hours to do a short video clip of a montage. And that's exactly it. It is using Russia because it was already pre-established. Basically, Putin fell out of favor when he came out against the invasion of Iraq, and when he started to try to reconsolidate assets that had been privatized towards oligarchs that were seen to be too much either beholden or too Western leaning. And he prevented the sale of the privatization or the Western ownership of, I can't remember which oil company, or he reversed it, of like a state of basically of like state oil resources, basically determining like, no, I have to draw a line here because this is a threat to national security to allow an American or a British company to own our oil reserves, kind of thing, or even for it to be in the hand of an oligarch who's that way facing and not this way facing, right? And once that happened, The Economist came down. Like, The Economist has this like mad obsession with Putin. It's been going on for years, like front page things of like evil Putin. And you can see the shift. This shift happened after he started to consolidate and come down on oligarchs whose corruption was Western facing, and started to block certain levels of asset sell-offs towards, as I said, and when he came out against the Iraq War. And that was it. It's not like human rights have changed, like in Russia. It was like, oh, okay, well, we don't like these particular foreign policy positions, so we're going to then reignite our expansion of NATO or our hostility towards, and basically Putinify everything. So everything is about Putin. It's not even like about the Russian oligarchy. And notice how they only use the term oligarch when they're talking about Russia, which is weird. Because like, I've been using that my whole life. Right, oligarch is a Greek word. It has a very old concept, and basically means a society run by a small number of people, which would also mean Britain and the United States, right, and France and Germany, right. And the left have long been critiquing like Western states as being oligarchs, right, like for a very, very long time, and referring to these states as oligarchies. So that's not a new thing. It's like they've discovered these words and they start using them only to target certain people. So yeah, people should absolutely look into these revelations. As that I'm glad you brought it up, Andrew. It is Andrew, right? Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think it's so, and I think it's so telling too, because they are all, if the United States is accusing somebody else of doing something, there's a very good chance that that's what they're doing. That's kind of how they throw that around, is they accuse people of doing the things that they're doing. It's a distraction. It's great propaganda. It's very effective. And you're right. I do think that Russia was definitely just used as a distraction. There was already that preconceived fear that was built up in society that they could use. And now as, they're able to shift that to China.
Yeah, the temper. Oh, and I also should have said Syria as well, because of Russia's stance on Syria backing Assad meant there was also a pre-existing template there. So it was in terms of the wider population, right? So it's like, okay, Putin's backing Assad, we're backing these rebels, etc. So then that is also already planted in people's minds. But we'll see it. It's going to be, while it's not going to disappear, the focus is going to be increasing on China. And if you look at the Council on Foreign Relations, their position on China, as was their position on Russia, it's quite clear that their position is like one of containment, which is sort of quite disturbing. I was writing about that a couple of years ago, just reading through their documents, right? Because they do their best to set the foreign policy agenda. And you do see it. You see like things that you see happening now. You see were being argued for a number of years ago at the council, which is the whole point of the council, is to get people together to come to agree what the position should be in defense of the capitalist class of the United States, which isn't always easy because they have competing interests, but they also have colliding interests as well. Colliding?
Yeah.
Complementary, maybe?
Complement. Yeah.
Something.
Maybe.
Something. Uniting.
Demonic might be a good term to throw in there.
Overlapping.
Overlapping. There you go. Overlapping.
But Mo,
is good.
I want to thank you very much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure having you on the vigils with us. And your work on Craig Murray and Julian Assange's case has been absolutely phenomenal. So please keep that up.
Yes. Thank you.
But if you could, please let people know where they can find you and where they can find your work.
So my work is published at The Canary at Sputnik UK, although my final piece, which will be an interview with the former CIA whistleblower Jeffrey Sterling, will be a video piece and a written piece, will come out, I'm hoping, on Wednesday, and that will be my final piece with Sputnik. more on that later, I suppose. But people can follow me on Twitter at M for Mohammed El Mazi, ELMAAZI. And over there's like a link in the profile where muckraker.com, whoever they are, for some reason, keep compiling all of the articles I write. So you can either click on that. I don't know who they are and how they keep doing that, but maybe they're trying to get me to sign up to show, like, hey, look what we can do. But it seems to be automatic.
That's very kind of them to do that. Thank you,
Yeah.
Muckraker.
So I stumbled upon it by accident once. So if you click there, you can see the various things I've published and the various outlets. And but if you go in and type my name into the search engine in Sputnik, at least you can find all the things I've published there as well, because that's where the majority of my work has been published over the last year and a half, with a few examples. Jacobin as well. I've done 2 pieces of Jacobin. I've got a third one coming up about a new bill that's being debated in Parliament about attempts to curb the right to protest here, to make it easier for police to arrest people and to stop and prevent protests. The last piece was about another law which has passed, which allows criminal conduct to be authorized by a plethora of agencies, like 15 in Britain, including the whole military and the whole police, etc., but on British soil. And the regulators and the tax authority and the Environmental Protection Agency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I discuss not only what the law proposed and now does, but all the failed amendments. So there's an amendment to say you can't apply this to unions, right? And then that failed, right? So, like, why should you want to be authorizing people to commit criminal conduct inside unions? If you're saying this is about, like, gangs, like something out of Eastern Promises, if you ever saw that, it's a great film. Like these are like heavy, like Russian mafia gangs. It's like, well, attempts to say you can't authorize criminal conduct when it comes to an asset who's a victim of sex trafficking or juvenile or mentally or otherwise vulnerable. That failed. Attempts to restrict the authorization of rape, torture, and murder failed.
It's that we've been riding on that law the longest time because it is fucking terrifying, right?
It is.
So your guys is like, I think it's called the Home Office, but your group that handles your National Health Institute, like your form of single payer healthcare.
No, that's the Department of Health. That's not the Home Office.
That's the Department of Health.
Home Office is internal security.
Okay.
Right? So you don't have an equivalent in the United States, but other countries do. Like Ministry of the Interior, you'll hear it called in other countries. But the Home Office, policing, immigration, criminal justice, things like that. MI5.
Yeah. Well, right now in almost downtown London, you guys have a former military base that is being used to house, I believe it's immigrants, but I'm not positive. But people are being held 30 per room inside of a former military bunker, right as that Department of Health got their authorization to break the law for the financial benefit of the United Kingdom. So what I'm horrified about is large-scale legal mass human experimentation, similar to what you would see in the V for Vendetta movie, where they were trying to find a cure for a disease that they hadn't yet released on society yet. So I appreciate you writing so hard about that law. I appreciate you following that and reporting on everything that comes out about the fact that the UK can now violate its own laws with impunity. So thank you, Mo, because that is one of the most important things that is getting almost no coverage right now. So your work on that is greatly appreciated.
Yes, agreed.
And thank you for inviting me.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Of course, we love having you.
Apologies.
All right.
So late.
Oh, it's fine. It worked out perfect.
Oh yeah. Don't worry about that. We're very flexible. We're very professional here, Mohammed. Oh, all right, Andrew. You want to wrap this thing up, man?
Yep. My name's Andrew Smith. You can follow me on Twitter at Andrew Zigman. You can follow us on Twitter at action_4Assange. Stay tuned for posts about our official April 11th events for the 2-year anniversary of Julian's transfer from the prison of the Ecuadorian Embassy to the prison of Belmarsh, which is called the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom. So far, we have 2 West Coast events planned on the 10th and the 11th. We will be coordinating with Alex Hills to get international events going. I believe London is doing a bus tour that day all around the city for Free Assange. And we will be having events here, I believe, in Columbus, Ohio, on the East Coast for everyone. So thank you very much. And as always, you are the ones that make this possible, the people that watch and share. So please keep doing it, because we've managed to create so many waves at this point that we just keep pushing forward.
Yep, that's all we can do. And I am Misty Winston. You can find me on Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust. I have another show called Facts on the Ground with Jesse Zerwell. Actually, in about an hour and a half, we're going to be doing a live stream with Jesse Jett, who is an amazing musician and artist. And he's going to be playing us some more songs. And we're going to be talking about how politics influences his work. So definitely tune in for that. He's awesome. I love him so much. And you can get his album on Bandcamp if anybody's interested. I highly recommend it. Other than that, just stay tuned for the events we're going to be planning coming up for April 11th. That's a really important date for us. So if you want to, again, I know I already said this once during the show, but if you would like to organize an event, or if you would like to find an event near your area, please contact me on Twitter. I am more than willing to help anybody figure out the kind of intricacies of, permits and all of the stuff that you may need to do. Or I will find you somebody that can help you with those answers, or I can, kind of connect you with other people in your area that you can hold events with. So definitely reach out to me on Twitter if that's something you're interested in. I've already had, yesterday, I think I had like 10 people contact me about participating in different events in different areas. So let's keep that up. We're growing the movement. Every time we do one of these shows or an event or something, we're just building the support for Julian and for press freedom and free speech, which is seriously important. So, and thanks to everybody in the chat. I love you guys. You know what I'm talking about, but I love you guys. And obviously thanks to Muhammad and Deepa for coming on today. Two of my favorite people to speak to. So yeah, and I guess I hate having to close, and Steve's not here, and I hate him for not being here. So I guess I'll just say good luck to us all.